Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would like to speak to those on the back row lining the back side over there. I am one of the back row type of people also, but when I'm presenting, I like to talk to people and not tables. So back row people, please feel free to come sit up closer.
It's a known fact you'll get a better grade if you sit on the front.
Yes, but there may be an opportunity that I might pick on you, but that's okay. If you're back row people, you're fine getting picked on, so usually. So while Julia is fiddling with a couple of different things, wow, you guys actually do what I asked. That is so rare. I can't even tell you. That's very cool. I do remember submitting a bio for the conference. I did not realize it was going to be a full page with my face and everything on it. So I won't go into a lot of details about myself because of that. But just one quick note I think that will be helpful. And I'm usually loud enough that people in the room won't have a problem. And I'm going to try really hard to make them wish that they were in our class. So there we go. So my name is Wendy Farr, and I, back in 1990s-ish, I had the wonderful opportunity to live next door to a gentleman named Earl Lowry, actually, his last name. And he looked kind of familiar, but we didn't know how we knew him, but he looked familiar. And we realized that on Sunday, we were at our faith services, and we're like, oh, that's the cute little guy who sits on the back row at our church services. That's who he is. So we ended up becoming close to him and to his daughter, who was a single mom at the time. Her daughter, Emily, so it was Earl, Karen, the daughter, single mom, and then her daughter, Emily. Emily, at 11 years old, started taking care of our cat, and since she didn't kill the cat, we kept letting her take care of our child at that point. And so she became our main babysitter for our kids. And when my daughter was born in 1995, Earl was definitely suffering from some, we already knew he had Alzheimer's, but was really significantly starting to impact his daily life. At the time, I would say he was the latter part of middle stages. And I flew with his daughter, Karen, and my daughter, my baby one-year-old daughter on my lap to Salt Lake. And I went with the family to help transition him into a facility in Holiday, which is where her brother was. And so that's why they moved him here. The experiences that we had with him and their family through all of that is what impressed us in our lives, that we wanted to do something more meaningful and what we could do for those around us. And so in 2004, significant many years later, my husband and I got crazy and decided to open a non-medical home care company. Whoa, we had no idea what we were doing. And the journey that we began with Grandpa Earl and where that went, once he was in the facility, and it was a long-term care facility, he definitely nosedived into the later stages. That change of environment really had a big impact on him. Something I will bring up a little bit later, in those moments as we were transitioning him that afternoon, he was becoming angry, belligerent. He was starting to swear at us because we were at his son's house, David's house, and he swore up and down that we were at his brother Alvin's house. And around the corner was the Waffle House that that Alvin had and that we used to to run. And the family was arguing with him. No, Dad, this is my house. No, Alvin's not. No, and he kept getting angrier and angrier. And finally, my background in special education, I took the family outside and I said, leave him alone. What does it matter where he's at? And that was the moment that they had their personal meltdown as a family. And I left them in the back to have their tears and their moment. And I went back inside and I said, so what kind of waffles did Elvin make? And he went on for an hour and a half about how delicious those waffles were. And that was my first experience, really, in dealing with dementia. And that's why we moved forward. Years later, we opened a home care. I have been volunteering as an educator for the association in Colorado for about 17 years. And things just working out. I am very proud and excited about being a new staff member. Now I get to be on the other side of the table, but I've been on your side, and I really like to have a lot of interactive and engagement when we're doing these classes. These are tough topics, really tough. And I want you to feel comfortable acknowledging that this is tough stuff to talk about, okay? So, you've already heard a lot of stuff today. I'm not going to get into a lot of the before stuff, okay? We've talked about early stage, middle stage. You've had other things, and the panel during lunch was awesome. So I don't want to go into a too lot, like at the beginning stuff. I want to get deeper into what we're going to talk about. So a new way of thinking about those late stages. So traditionally, people think of it as a time of a lot of loss. Things progress, and now we're looking at multiple areas where they have lost function, lost abilities, and that can be very discouraging. And this can be a hard topic and I don't want it to go that way. So I'm going to share one other experience before we get into some of this deeper stuff. I never liked my maternal grandmother. She was mean, and she was very difficult. Now, I will give a little background on that. My parents got divorced when I was 14, and at the time I was an obnoxious teenager I was probably not doing what I should have been doing to help my single mom. And my grandmother had no problem telling me what a horrible teenager I was. So there are reasons why. Many years later, when I was married and I had a small child, I was inspired by a very motivational lesson that I had the opportunity to be a part of with my faith community about forgiveness. And I decided that, and even though she was in her 90s and lived far, far away, I needed to do that for myself. And so I started writing little notes once or twice a month, and I would send a little note. Well, Jonathan's doing this now, and Jonathan's doing that. And I just was my way of healing my heart. I really had no idea what was happening at the other end. Years later, and I'm talking probably 12 years later, my sister went out to California with my mom, and they were visiting my grandmother. She was at that time she was in her late 90s. And she, as my sister and my mom were there, she kept talking to my sister, and she was saying, "Are you the one that writes me the note cards?" And this had been years since I had stopped writing them. And my sister, trying to be appropriate, goes, "Oh, well, no, that was Wendy, Grandma." She goes, "Oh, okay." 5 minutes later, "Are you the one who writes me those note cards?" So a couple times, eventually my sister actually said, "Well, yes, Grandma, did you like those?" Now, on a personal note, she took credit for all of my work, and that really is annoying. However, she was in the late stages. And by my sister willingly putting herself in my role, because imagine how she felt. She was getting credit for something she knew she didn't do. But she said, "Yes, Grandma, that was me." And my grandmother, who I never liked very much, expressed her gratitude. Something I would never have heard, I would never have experienced. And my sister got to be a part of that. And then I, on the turn, actually got to be a part of it also. So and the reason I bring that to you now is late stages is really tough. But you have to step back, stop worrying about what's happening, where they are. Okay, it doesn't matter if we're at David's house or Alvin's house. You got to pack your bag. You got to go visit them wherever they're at, right? Didn't matter that Lori wasn't Wendy. It mattered that the connection was made. She got to show gratitude. I got to hear about it, and my sister got to be that mediator. What a blessing. What an incredible opportunity for her. So that's the positive I want you to think about when we move forward with some of these other conversations, okay? Focus on physical care and management. That's a big part of these later stages. The emotional life of that person sometimes is not considered in a formal care planning. We talk a lot about the physical, but the emotional part isn't sometimes. And we're not even going to try to do the videos. They're not working. So we really do want to think about a holistic approach to the later stages. Now, I've been doing this 17 years, and I am a testament right here that what we are now teaching is not what we used to teach. It's very different because we're learning a whole lot more about what they need and about how it works for them. So yes, their physical well-being is at utmost importance, but there's some emotional things that we can do that can be very helpful. All right, and it's also it's a feel good for us too. Increasing the focus on them as their self, like their awareness and who we know of them, and individualizing the care and the different the provisions that we provide for them too. Has anybody ever noticed that someone who has dementia changes their personality somewhat? Anybody ever notice that?
No.
Yeah. Woo. Yeah. Sometimes it's for the better. I actually have had a conversation with someone today where they said their mom actually has gotten a little bit easier because they've had a contentious relationship as a mother and daughter. It's pretty common to hear that. Sometimes it goes the other way. Fortunately, there's some anger sometimes. It's hard to get over that. And there are those moments of clarity. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, it's going to make everything better. It's going to make you feel like it's all worth it. It'll be a bright moment, but I would not want to set you up for failure to think that I haven't had any of those recently. I must not be a good caregiver. That's got nothing to do with it, okay? And the last of the abilities, some of those abilities can be reemerged, not just through music, which I know they're doing a lot of music stuff over tomorrow too, but the things that brought them joy can sometimes kind of reopen those things for later, re-emerge those parts of the personality. The changes usually become much more pronounced. For example, Grandpa Earl, whew, man, he started swearing up a storm. And I say this with all the love in my heart, it was old man swearing too. It was awesome. I loved it, it was like, yeah. And the care roles become very physically demanding. Because as their abilities to meet their own care, their self-care for their physical well-being can be very physically demanding. I don't know if there's anything out here that is like a home health aid class or not. I wouldn't say even like a CNA class. That's probably more than what anyone would need. But something like a lower level home health aid class. We used to have one that was like for 20 hours, but it taught proper lifting, very basic stuff. But as a caregiver with the physical demands of what people are having to do and what's required of them, those basic things would be really important. The last thing anyone needs to deal with is a bad back or somebody who gets hurt or things like that. And so any kind of additional training that you can get is going to be better. And the caregiver becomes the advocate on behalf of that person. So being at the doctor appointments, understanding, I cannot stress enough to people, you need to get yourself a notebook. Remember those old steno notepads, the ones with a spiral on it? That needs to be an ongoing documentation of what's happening, when you went to the doctor, as you get into the deeper stuff like a toileting time plan, writing stuff down, making sure, because I will guarantee you, you will not remember. You won't remember later. So we've heard all today and tomorrow as well, tips on how you can take care of yourself. Do you know what the statistics are for people who are the caregiver, caring for an individual, and how their health deteriorates? It is most likely that the person as the caregiver will die more quickly than the person living with the dementia. Why? Give me some ideas. Why do you think that is? Why?
I could give you an example.
Please.
Tuesday, we had to go to an Instacare because I thought I broke an ankle. Had a friend that nearly fell. I caught her. Thought I broke an ankle. Go to the Instacare. I have gout. Rich foods, creamy foods.
My husband gets gout. Soda, red meat. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
30 pounds more in the last 4 years of me. And I'm protein packing, slow.
So here's the thing. People, and you're going to hear a lot about how the planning part of the later stages especially are important to plan for the care of that loved one. But the plan is going to change when the primary caregiver is no longer able to be the caregiver. Because they're the ones who will have the heart attack. They're the ones who are going to have an incident. They're going to be the ones who are no longer available to be the caregiver, or even if it's temporary. Let's say you had broken your ankle. You would be in the hospital, you'd be in a rehab, possibly you'd be out for at least 3 weeks. Who's going to take over? So there has to be plan A, plan B, plan C.
My plan A, I had two hip replacements 6 weeks apart. My mother went stroke. It was $62,000 later. She'd recovered from her stroke, but she had to be sent away because they couldn't do any lifting.
Okay, first of all, we're going to change what you just said. You didn't send her away. You made a choice on a placement that was for her well-being and for your well-being. Okay? We're not going to say put her away or send her to a location or put a facility. That's not okay. You didn't send her away. Do you see the difference? It's a choice, and the placement was a choice for her well-being because you couldn't continue to care for her, and obviously you weren't able to care for her for your well-being either. So no one's putting anybody anywhere and putting them away. So the basic self-care. Well, I am a really poor example of this right now because after 2 years, we finally made the really difficult decision to move back here to Utah after 30 years someplace else. I packed on 35 pounds thanks to COVID. Everybody had their COVID weight, right? And last March, I lost 30 pounds. So I was like, woohoo! And then we're moving and I've packed on 20 more pounds. And the reason I share that is because I know for me, stress up and down with my weight. Do you know what you do to yourself personally when you go under stress? If you know what you do, if it's too much eating, if it's not enough, if it's not enough sleep, what is it that you personally, what's your bad habits? You've got to look out for that. You've got to prevent that from happening. We had a wonderful talk last Saturday. We got the opportunity to go up in Logan at the senior center. There was a caregiver conference, and Dr. May, who was at the hospital up there, had caregiving for her mother and for her father who was in cancer, and talked about the stresses of caregiving and her personally as a physician. And it doesn't matter who you are. We all have to take time to care for ourselves because you were actually doing a disservice to the one that you're trying to care for if you don't. So communication changes. This is probably one of the things that I know people get the most frustrated and lack of patience.
Oh my God.
That's right. So because you don't know necessarily what it is that they are wanting, what they're needing. I was a part of a really interesting experience where we had a reminiscence unit in one of our local communities that had a deaf resident, and as part of the attempt to help give them care, that particular building hired a deaf caregiver to be able to sign to that person when they were in the unit. Well, without knowing what was going on, within 2 months, the other residents were signing. Think about that. No, they not. Who says that? Okay. They did not learn anything new, and here's why. What did I just say to you?
You're cold in here.
I'm cold.
You're thirsty. You're hungry.
Those are signs that we have all known since we were 18 months, 2 years old. It wasn't things that they were learning that was new. So paying attention, those are deep embedded memories that they will never, honestly, that's stuff that they don't forget. The nonverbal. Again, I used to own a home care agency. We had lots of caregivers. Some of them were terrible. I'll just be honest with you. They weren't great. But the ones who were really good they were intuitive about reading someone's language. So I'm going to pick on you again. I told you shouldn't have. Yeah, okay. So if she tells me something I'm interested in, what am I going to do? I'm going to lean into that, right? Because I'm curious about what she's saying. Now, if she says something that I don't like, what am I going to do? Yeah, you just did it. Exactly. You're going to go, ooh. Pay attention to those things. Notice it. If there's a particular type of juice and you notice that your loved one or whoever you're caregiving for kind of try different juice or ask. And if you want to, start modeling some of those signs. You know them. Eat, drink, cold. Don't know if they'll know toilet and bathroom, but that might be something that could be helpful. It's still intuitive. Maybe they could figure that out. That would be a little bit newer information for them. The other one's not so much. But model that. Go, Mom, are you thirsty? Do you want some milk? Do you want some juice? No, obviously there's a new sign for each of those. But, are you thirsty? Model it every single time. I'm curious. Love to find out if that actually makes a difference for your person. Again, learn what those mean. What does it mean for them? And be in the moment with that person. So, what changed with me and Grandpa Earl that day? What brought down his anxiety? The waffles. What waffles did Alvin make? And we talked for an hour while we're waiting to actually, for the time frame when we were supposed to drive over to the facility. Be in that moment. Talk about those things. Now, this is where the patience comes in, because you probably have had this conversation 1,000 times.
Or heard the same thing.
Or heard the answer 1,000 times. This is where your team can come in. And that's really important to build that, because it may not be that you need them to do anything. You just need them to listen. Julia talked about that with both the previous classes about building your care team. Well, maybe it needs to be your listening team. Maybe that's all that they need to do. So communication tips. Communicate without words. Communicate without words. So I just very briefly gave you some ideas on how to read them. Well, guess what? They're reading you. They are reading you. It's hard. Yes?
It's my mother. She's 87. But what I did, and what I figured out, is that I went and I hugged her like I would as a child. And I hadn't received that from her in a very long time. And I think just that connection.
Absolutely. Now I'm gonna do something, and normally I don't always know if I don't always do it, but I'm thinking my first row here is pretty cool, so I'm gonna try it. Okay, so imagine this. Mom, why are you wearing that top? That's not the top I set out. I didn't want you wearing that top. It's not the right one. It's too cold outside. You need to have a sweater with that one. And I got to go back in and get the sweater. Oh, why? Okay, you know that is not the right time. Why are you trying to brush your teeth right now? This isn't, no, we got to go have dinner. Then we'll brush our teeth later. That's not the time to do that. Mom, okay, would you please stop? That's not, okay, let me go get your shoes, and then we'll try to we got to put your socks on before you try to put your shoes on. We can't have your sandals have socks on top of them.
Were you in my house last night? Yeah.
The reason Grandpa Earl got so angry that day was because all he was hearing was, no, this isn't the right house. You're wrong. You're stupid. This is David's house. It's not Alvin's house. Those weren't the words that we were saying. But that's how he was feeling. No one likes to feel like they're being told that they're stupid or that they're wrong or that, they did it the wrong way. Now, I appreciate your emotion on that because the first time I did that in a class was by accident. I was teaching first responders in a very rural county area, and it was first responders, and I was me, and I did it. And a woman in the front table put her head down and started bawling. And I was like, what did I do? And she lifted her head up and she says, I talk to my dad like that all the time. Yeah. And that's okay. But when you hear yourself saying that, remember how it felt to see somebody do it to another person. It's just trying to step back from that moment of caregiving and remember that there's still that person you love. And yes, your patience is run thin. And yes, you're tired. And it's the same story again. But you need to step back and remember it doesn't feel good to be made to feel like you're inadequate, even if it's not intentional. And I would imagine that anyone who is here today with the intention of getting education has no intention of ever making their loved one feel bad. So it's okay, but moving forward, remember how that feels. Because I know I don't like it when somebody says stuff to me. It makes me feel, and again, unintentional, but it does happen. So that's where the body language, the facial expressions, you can say, love you, Dad, right? That's why you have to have a bigger care team and the listening team who will come and listen. Identifying family and friends becomes difficult for them. Again, like my grandmother, she didn't know it was Lori or Wendy. Now, that can cause a lot of hurt feelings with family members. I did a consultation with my best friend and his 6 siblings, their dad, and a couple of the spouses. So there's 10 of them, all for their mom. And one of the sons said, because we're in Colorado, he's the only one that was living in Provo. And he's like, is she going to forget me more easily because I'm not the one who's around? And that was a hard reality for him. Sadly, I said, no, probably not, because she has no clue what's going on right now. The right now is not what's important. The sad thing is that my friend, his name was Corey, he was the oldest. Everything was about Corey. There were 7 children, and everything was, well, when's Corey coming over? When's Corey going to be back? Da-da-da-da-da. Because in her mind, she was a young mother with 1 child. And it was painful for him because he could see the pain on his siblings' faces. It was hard for them because they felt like, okay, my time, my service is not worthwhile. You just got to get rid of the names. Just forget about that. It's not them intentionally doing that. Knowing that someone's important to them, that's the common thing. So the fact that my grandmother wanted to express her gratitude, that was what was important, and that somebody who could be in my shoes in that moment was able to do that. And luckily, my sister likes me, so that's a plus, right? But she took that moment, and I'm so grateful that she did, because I got to hear and know how special those cards had been to her. But you got to, got to take the ego part out of that. And especially at this time for them, the whole world is about just the 5 senses. Okay, the communication takes a step back. It's about the touch, it's about their smell. Taste is super important to them. Just the blandness of the food, oftentimes that they're stuck with because of maybe other medical issues. So really checking on that. And, if they're not enjoying their meals or things like that, adding a little bit of sugar or a little bit of sweetness, based on whatever their medical and dietary things are. But being aware of those senses. As far as having those moments of intimacy, I love what you just shared about the hug with your mom. Going back to those moments of touch, of relationship. If this is hard for you, imagine how it is, especially if it's your parent, and they're feeling like they are no longer in that role of parent. It's really difficult. And so that's helpful.
Do you have any advice for when they're not aware of their relationship anymore? Like if there's an older man that has Alzheimer's and he doesn't understand that he's married to his wife that's caring for him, and so he doesn't want her to help him put his underwear on or in the shower, or if she's in the bathroom in the shower, he won't go in to use the toilet because she's in the bathroom and he can't see her naked because that's wrong. But they're married and have been for 50 plus years. How do you help them navigate that so that it's not traumatic for them?
I would say if you can get help from others, that would probably be good. I'm just going to say this out loud. Maybe that's a good thing for her.
Because then she doesn't have to deal with it?
Well, no, but just that is one heavy burden to carry. And not that you want to step outside of all the intimate kind of self-care needs that he'll have. But
It's Marty. That's yoga.
That's the yoga. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're going to have more fun now. We can be louder than them. I can't be louder than the bell or the gong. But we actually did have a situation when we had our home care business. And we had a gentleman who was sundowning. And so we had a caregiver who was going in like 4 or 5 hours in the evenings. And she told us, she goes, I think he thinks I'm a hooker. And we're like, really? And she's like, yeah, because he would mutter under his breath. Okay, that was a really good time for her to gong that bell. That's right, yeah. And he would say things like, no, this is wrong. No, that would be, no, she's too young. No. And we kind of laughed. We were like, okay. She goes, well, if he starts playing crab ass, I'm out of here. I'm not going to stick around. And we kind of laughed it off. He wasn't in any way being inappropriate. It just, he would mutter under his breath. So one time she had a car problem. We had an ice storm. Her wiper blades got ripped off of her windshield. And so my husband said, go on down to the shift. I'll go get you some new wiper blades. So he went and did that in the parking lot, went into the community where he was living at the time, because it was assisted living, and knocked on the apartment door and just said, hey, just want you to know, I got the wiper blades on, so you're good to go home. And she's like, oh, awesome, thank you so much. Closes the door. The client says, well, who was that? And she said, well, that's my boss. And he said, wow, he keeps his girls on a tight leash. And I'm just going to say this. So we joke about the fact that my little Mormon husband is the pimp, but he also does have to laugh. There are so moments, yeah, but you still need to get the care done.
Well, and if you're living in the same room and sleeping in the same bed, and then all of a sudden that's uncomfortable for one of you, but there's not a
Yes. What I would do in that situation is I would investigate a little bit more. What is the actual thing? Is it because he doesn't think you're married? Is it he's forgotten that you are his wife? What is it? And kind of find out a little bit more about what it is about that is making him uncomfortable. And then once you realize what it really is it that he thinks that you're not, a couple? I'm like, does that make sense? Like finding out what it is. I mean, does he think you're a hooker?
No. Be a hooker.
I mean, I didn't say that, but yes. No, but sometimes you got to get creative. See, our class just became more fun.
Now they're wishing they were.
That's right. Now they're wishing they were over here. But I think really understanding what aspect of it that's making him uncomfortable, and then you can start to reemphasize the part of it that is preventing him from letting you to do it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay.
Communication.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, but try that and find out a little bit more about what it specifically is that's bothering him about it. And is it religious beliefs? Is it just a modesty issue? I mean, find out what it is, and then maybe we can attack it later. And we'll give you our cards, and we'll try to process the next step. Okay?
I think communication is a big deal. Because how do you find that out? I mean, you've got to observe their reaction.
That's true. And it might be, you might be trying to help provide it, and somebody else is watching to kind of see his reaction to kind of narrow down a little bit more what it is. And it, yes.
Could you spend just one few moments on the sundowning area too? I don't know, understand a lot about it, but I know it's an issue, and it is an issue with me right now too, and I don't know a lot about how to deal with that.
So first of all, sundowning, it really is about their biological time clock, and it just sort of adjusts and changes a little bit. There's something about the circadian clock that's in our bodies and how it adjusts and changes for them. It just puts them at the wrong time. So what I've heard some family caregivers who, when they go to bed, then they go to bed. Like their timing was off. I mean, they'd go to bed at 5 o'clock at night, and they'd wake up at 2 o'clock when they'd start pacing the house again.
To bring up a lot of anxiety, is that what?
It does.
So I don't deal with that.
Right. In one of the other classes, there's actually a prompt that talks about a woman who paces up and down all day long, or in the evenings like that. We'll start doing our Tai Chi. And she would just pace. Well, what was interesting is in investigating a little bit more of that prompt, we find out that she had been a night nurse for 45 years. And of course she'd be up at night. That was her natural, she had changed her circadian, or her clock. And so she would walk and pace, and she would pace, and she would pace. And then so as a family, they actually started learning how to allow certain tasks that would help her, like make her feel like she's still the charge nurse. Like, oh yes, those are the towels that need to be taken care of. Oh yes, that is the way that those are cooked up for dinner. Yes, I will do that, or whatever. But kind of played into what it was that was bringing her anxiety. And for her, she'd spent all those times being a nurse at night. And so sundowning is sundowning, and sometimes that's just all it is. But you might want to think about some other aspects of what particularly is keeping him up and pacing, and is there things that you can play into that. I will tell you right now, and I don't know if this came up with Julia, but I personally, as a longtime professional in this industry, am giving you permission to lie to your loved ones.
I'm sure you've already eaten one.
Oh yes. So, and I say that as a therapeutic fib, that you know that they are unable to make a choice for themselves because they don't understand. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not time to watch TV blaring loud. Okay, you don't understand. I mean, they can't comprehend that. But you do know that, and you know that there's things that their bodies need, food, however it might be. It is okay to say, oh, that was like 15 minutes ago. We took care of that already. I am so sorry. You know what? We'll do it tomorrow night. We'll take care of it tomorrow night. Now, that only works. You got to be careful with it. But there are some families that, well, I could never lie to my mother. Yeah, you can. And you should. You wouldn't lie to your child or to your husband or spouse or whatever. Yeah, sure, go walk in the road. Yeah, it's okay. Just go walk in the street and get hit by a car. You wouldn't let that happen. But because they are an adult, they can make some choices for themselves. You sometimes have to navigate that and manipulate it to a way that they will accept, in a way that's going to be best for you and for them. I mean, obviously for them, but also so that you can do what you need to do that's appropriate for their well-being as well. Obviously, the touch, very, very important. Anytime you can, I don't know, maybe that's something to try. No, and I don't mean this in a weird way because you're trying to give him, care. But holding his hand before you're trying to do something that'd be like a toileting thing or something like that, and just have that moment of connection, like, I'm an important person to you, and before you start trying to get him on the toilet. Does that make sense? But do you see what I mean? Sometimes we are in such a hurry as a caregiver. We got to get it done. I got to hurry. I only have so much time. But if it's providing anxiety for him, you're actually taking more time than it would be. So maybe having that moment, looking him in the eye, holding his hand, whatever makes sense, try that. And then maybe it will feel natural for him to allow you to have him on the toilet or to take care of his personal needs. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, that touch is different. It's a different touch than just, oh, I'm going to go shake her hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So, trying to find activities. I know this is so hard. I am so sorry. It's difficult to find something that is purposeful and doesn't feel like you're just babysitting. And I'm so sorry. So try to find something that is meaningful, but is still helping with some of those abilities that they're able to do. So I talked about a basket of towels. Okay, that works maybe for someone who is a housewife. What were some things that the person liked to do? Were they really good at needlepoint? Were they really good? What were the things that they used to do that they were really good at? Okay, focus in on some of those things. I know a lot of women who did like intricate, like embroidery or things like that, get real frustrated when they're not able to do that anymore and they can't see very well. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your 25-year-old daughter come over and have your mother try to teach her how to do it. Now, she may be a terrible teacher at it, but it makes her feel like she's still doing something and something that she loved to do. Yes?
So many of these things are directed to women, you know, who have been home, and now you're home, and so it's more comfortable. But if your husband has got up every morning and gone to work, say he was a businessman, like he didn't do little tasks like that. He didn't have woodworking, like he was a businessman.
I actually just had a conversation about an hour and a half ago with a family struggling with something similar because they were out very, very busy doing things. Talk to a coworker. What were some of those tasks that that person did? What were the things that they, you know, whether they were an accountant or a CPA, have them have an accounting book that just has numbers and just let them, even if they can't add them up, just let them play with the, you know, whatever makes sense and makes them feel comfortable because it's familiar to them. Look at what their job was and what were the tasks that they did every day. If they didn't do woodworking and having something available for them to, because we don't want to make it feel like we're giving them a toy, right? Because that can sometimes feel like it's disrespectful. So, but what did they do? What were the tasks that they did in their everyday life? If you think about it, that's easier than someone who didn't have a full-time job and was around the house. So if you really look at what their jobs were, what they did, how they interacted with their co-workers or their colleagues, or were they a shift supervisor, what was it they did? Find some of those things. What did they hate about their jobs? And like, you know, give them opportunities where like, okay, well, this is, you hated doing this part. Let's work on this. Let's do this now. Well, we're going to change this and we're going to reorganize this so it'll be the way you've always wanted to do it. Whatever works. You just gotta, you know, what's the gambling game, the roulette. It's a game of roulette. Just throw something at it and see if it works. Now, here's the sad part. It might work, and it would be great, but only temporarily. And you might find something that would be awesome. Oh, this is keeping him busy, and he is feeling purposeful, and it's 3 weeks, and then it's gone. So it's constantly spinning that roulette wheel and hoping that you'll find something else that works. And I would say that when you're at the point when you just do not have the energy to even spin that roulette wheel to try something new, it might be time to start talking about what point you are at as a caregiver. Does that make sense? Okay, because the second half of this class, which we are never going to get to and was never intended to today, is about when is the right time for placement, like, and why, and at that level. Nobody knows when that time is. No one knows, and it's different for every family, every person, every individual. The only person that can determine that is the person that is living it every day as the caregiver. Okay, we are getting down. So, in helping with providing the care, having the person mirror what you guys are doing, imitate. So whether it's brushing the teeth or whatever, are they still able to participate in some of that care? Guiding their hand, talking through the process. Again, that might be a good time to model. Okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make our dinner for tonight. You know, modeling whatever it is you're trying to do, but trying to extend their abilities as long as possible is really going to be a benefit, not just for them, but for you also, because when they are no longer able to do those things, that's good information to have. Do you know what I mean by that? So if they're able to follow, they're able to imitate, they're able to do it, and then they're not able to imitate, they're not, and I can see you're nodding your head, Michelle, that's right. That is a signal that there has been a change in ability and significant, and that needs to get written down. Okay, so daily care needs, almost always at this stage, it is pretty much around the clock care. Decisions about long-term care options. That doesn't mean long-term care nursing home. It means long-term care as a spectrum. Over here is totally independent. Way over here is totally dependent. There is a whole lot in between. So where do you start? A little bit at a time. The intention is to not wait too long, because if you do, a crisis or an injury might happen, and then they end up jumping to the other end too soon. And then that can be more costly, and it can be more emotional. So having those conversations. Communication with doctors, again, those marked changes, whatever is happening, keep it written down. And please, I know it's hard to remember, write it down. The last thing you need is a bunch of junk clogging up your brain. Write it down and then forget about it. Focus on the quality of life, and again, back to that person-centered care. And I got to wrap this up. Weight and eating changes. When I was reviewing this part for the class, something that stuck with me and I'd forgotten about that I think is really important that I want you guys to really think about. Weight changes. It doesn't matter if you're an awesome caregiver, if you're a mediocre caregiver, or a horrible caregiver. They're going to have changes in their weight. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job. However, I know that family and friends can be ignorant and stupid and just plain rude. And so take everything anyone says with a grain of salt, because what's going to happen is there's going to be changes in weight. They're not eating like they used to, the blandness, whatever might happen, they're not going to want to participate like they used to. And even if you've spoken with a doctor, and maybe it's okay that they lost a couple of pounds because it's not that critical, maybe their body, that's okay. But someone could come up and say, aren't you feeding her enough? Why aren't you feeding her more? She looks like she's a skeletal now. And your inclination may be to say, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea how hard this is. And they're right, you don't. They don't have a clue, right? But it's okay to be upset. but recognize that they're saying that out of complete ignorance, and just be confident in that I'm doing the right thing for my loved one and you're stupid. Does that make sense?
There is one thing that my mother is forgetting things like you don't eat pancakes with your fingers. So I don't go out with her sister. I go out with a couple of my friends that lost their mothers, and they don't mind if she picks up her pancakes with her fingers. You know, find the right people.
Amen. Thank you. I appreciate that. The fact that you're still going out to breakfast with her out in public, thank you. We do not have a lot of time. Okay, I'm going to tell you this one thing. Years ago, I won't tell you the situation. It was a big forum, though. We were all at different tables. We were given topics that we were supposed to discuss as a community. I was at a table with 5 or 6 people. One of them was a 96-year-old woman who is a full-time volunteer still. She was amazing. And the topic we had was, what do you feel is the reason for our current status of nursing homes? Okay, so it was a big conversation, you know. And this woman who was 96 said, well, the current situation with nursing homes the way that they are, and this was like almost 20 years ago now, she's like, is my generation's fault. And we all looked at each other like, what? She's like, oh, it's my generation's fault. It was my generation that if you were an unwed mother, we didn't want you in polite society. We sent you away to go have that baby. If you were deaf, if you were mute, if you were anything other than the normal, we didn't want you around. We only wanted what we wanted to see within our environment. And now we're the ones who are being tossed aside and we don't like it. I have never forgotten those words of wisdom, because what that tells me is that we are not where we should be, but we are a heck of a lot better than where we were. So having the courage to have a little of embarrassment at a restaurant with your mom who is eating with her fingers is awesome. And anybody who doesn't like it can just stick it, right? Well, actually, you can just say, well, since she's not using her fork, you can use mine to just stick yourself. We need that. We need people to see that. So do not ever let anybody question what you're doing. Now, you still have to do your best as a caregiver. And if you're at the point where you feel like you're not being the best caregiver, again, another signal, it's time to have more conversations. Okay, so a lot of this, I'm not, yeah. Let me see where I'm at though. Let me see. Toileting, kind of talked about that. We covered that. Working with doctors, work with them, not against them, right? We got that. We all know that. Important symptoms that are difficult at the later stages, pneumonia, a lot of that. The weight changes, bed sores, huge issue. You must pay attention to any rubbing wound or sore. Pay close attention to it. Don't mess with it. Make sure you get some outside help to actually come and take a look at it. Home health shouldn't be that difficult to arrange to come in to take a look at that, okay? Bed sores, again, all of that. And then, okay, I think that was the end. Okay, so, pain, okay, we didn't get very far. Okay. Okay, I'm going to finish up with this. The Alzheimer's Association is your friend today. Me, Julia, Michelle, all the people at our table, but I've said this to another family just a little while ago. Today is not your only opportunity. We are here with you through the entire journey. So after we helped take Grandpa to the facility, a few years later, we realized we really needed to see him because it was probably going to be not many more opportunities. But by that point, our older son, who they were buddies. I mean, they were buddies. They would walk across the street and he'd put pennies in the little horsey at the Safeway, and they just were buddies. They were very close. So when we went to go visit Earl, we tried to prepare the kids Grandpa's not going to remember. And we talked about him having an illness, blah, 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 blah. Well, one of the reasons why we had become so close to them is because when we would go to church on Sundays, the parking lot was mostly in the back, and it was a longer hallway that we would enter when we would come in. And it just so happened that every week, Grandpa would just be, lying against the wall right there at the back door. It's so coincidental, I don't know. And so we would walk in, and Jonathan would say, "Oh, Grandpa!" He's like, "Oh, what? I didn't know you'd be here." And he would run into his arms, and they'd have their moment. It was very sweet and very adorable. So, but we prepared the kids when we went to go visit him. I'm not going to remember. So we came in the front door, in the front corridor of the skilled facility, and Grandpa's room just happened to be on that main corridor. And we looked over, and Jonathan, being 5 years old, well, I guess closer to 6 at the time, just, "Grandpa!" and just ran to him. And Earl opened his arms and caught him. Now, and Joe and I were just like, whoa. He had no idea who we were. But he knew that little boy, and they had that connection. It was there. It was real. And we were stunned. I mean, we were like, oh my gosh. And he kind of recovered before we did. And he's like, "Well, hi, it's so good to see you." Again, no clue who we were. But he knew that we were important to him. He did know that. And so he gave us a tour of his building. And he's showing us the dining room, and he showed us, and here's his room, and he's showing us his bed, and all the different stuff. And as they're standing at the end of the bed, he turns to my husband, and he says, "So, Joe, how are you doing?" And then it was gone. But I always like to end on that, because that wasn't a moment for him. That was a moment for us. We meant something to him. We were not blood relatives, but our lives were intertwined in a way that not only was his life improved, my children have a love for the elderly. And I think of the thousands of people who were affected because of what we learned and how we've moved forward. So those moments are there. They are very rare. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But they are there. The later stages are tough. And if you're at that point where you feel like this is describing your situation, would you please contact us at the association? We will help guide you with how to look forward, planning, if you need to have placement, how to engage other people, having family consultations. That's what we do. That's who we are. The last thing I will encourage is to somehow get involved. Now, today, we've got a bunch of stuff on our table. If there are people that you know in your life who are going through this also, you now have just been enlisted in the army of dementia information. Take them the information. They weren't here. You were here. You can help. And maybe family members, whatever. Take whatever information we have, share it, because there is power in knowing you are influencing for good other people. So we have a walk. We have other events. We have the trial match, which is an opportunity to be a part of all kinds of different trials across the country. There's something very empowering about feeling like you're doing something. Regardless of what it is, it makes it feel like, okay, I'm doing something. I'm not just enduring this difficult problem, I'm doing something about it. And that lightens a lot of the burden. Any questions? Then I got to stop talking. You guys were awesome.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you.
All right.